share the experience with people that haven't been able to attend it. So we would certainly appreciate it if you do that. So this morning, we have a really, really great start today. We are starting with a panel discussion on digital transformation of the supply chain. So digital transformation of the supply chain is intended to ensure that digital applications improve service, cost, and inventory levels, performance, agility, and ultimately the value of any organization. Yet many companies do not prioritize their supply chains in their digital transformation strategies. How can organizations maximize the benefits from incorporating their supply chain management processes into their digital transformation strategies to drive operational excellence and competitive advantage? Handouts for the session are available, so I'd like to encourage you to take a digital copy of these. I'm pleased to welcome COBUS ROSSOUW, who is the chair for this panel discussion this morning. COBUS is an acclaimed industrial engineer and supply chain professional with corporate leadership, entrepreneurial, and professional advisory experience in consumer and industrial markets across sub-Saharan Africa. In his professional role since graduation, COBUS has focused on growth, transformation, and business improvement. He has worked in small teams of experts, has been responsible for bottom line profit and cash flow, and has led various corporate functions. Passionate about the potential of Africa, COBUS thrives when creating value collaboratively, increasingly made possible through the disruptive technologies enabling integration of logistics, route to market, and financial ecosystems. COBUS is a SAPEX past president, board, and EXCO member for many years. He's been a wonderful addition to the SAPEX team for a very, very long time, and we've been very grateful to have him. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to COBUS, who will introduce you to the rest of our esteemed panelists, and I have no doubt you will enjoy the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya, and thanks for the introduction. It's certainly a pleasure to be here. It's a great new thing to do. I think panels are great opportunities for provocative discussion. And thanks very much for the three people joining me today. So Paul MANIKAS is a global industry architect for Microsoft's consulting services group. He is responsible for advising line of business executives on the application of digital technologies to drive business transformation, with specialized expertise in digital factories and intelligent supply chains based on 40 years of experience in manufacturing. Prior to joining Microsoft, Paul was vice president for professional services at i2 Technologies, where he oversaw global supply chain implementations. And he was a partner with CSC's consulting manufacturing industry practice, where he led the strategic sourcing projects. Paul is joining us from the US, very, very early in the morning for him, so special thanks. YASH leads Accenture supply chain and operations practice in Africa, and he brings more than 20 years of experience working with supply chain leaders, helping them shape and execute on their transformation agenda. He also leads Accenture's African Supply Chain Delivery Center with more than 300 supply chain and procurement practitioners who run procurement and supply chains on behalf of African clients. Most of his recent focus has been involved in helping organizations scale and increase their return from their digital supply chain investments. Both Paul and YASH are also representing two of our new sponsors and involved providers in the conference, so thanks to you as well. And then there's Sean CULEY. I think everybody knows about him. He's been at the last few conferences and has really provided great content and entertainment in so many ways. Sean is an award-winning speaker, not only at SAPEX, generally, thought leader and an independent advisor and consultant. He has over 25 years of experience in business and supply chain transformation, helping a diverse range of organizations across multiple industry verticals and geographies. He's currently advising the United Nations in the redesign of the global supply chain. He's also a visiting fellow at Cranfield University, fellow of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, full master instructor, transformation advisor for the ASEAN, our partners in the US. And finally, he's the author of Transition Point, From Steam to Singularity, an in-depth analysis of the causes and drivers of technological progress and their potential impact on the current wave of technology on business, economy, and the wider society. Thank you very much for the three of you. I have asked all of us to be provocative, ask questions amongst ourselves. So I'm just going to introduce and then start the process. But firstly, I want to ask you in the audience, so do you think that the topic of this discussion is provocative? Or do you actually think that we do prioritize supply chains in our digital transformation strategies? My sense is that fintech and consumer-related disruptions are actually seen to be speeding ahead. And it feels to me as if supply chain transformation is not seen to be making as much of the potential of digital transformation. But that could be because we as supply chain professionals, and we, including myself, have been actually at it for a long time. I think we have to recognize that we've done a lot of things very digitally for a long time. We've been running MRP and SNOP processes, and we've been planning logistics and procurement using digital means. And these other people are actually just catching up with us. Or is it because we're actually just not good at selling our stories? So we're doing lots of digital stuff, but we're not telling people about it. Or could it be because the benefits of digitization is less in supply chain than it is in travel or in banking? Or maybe we've just never been able to get away with a poor service that, no disrespect intended, that those industries did get away with and have been disrupted with technology. The question today is, though, how can organizations maximize the benefits from incorporating their supply chain management processes into their digital transformation strategies? So how do we actually get benefit by making the supply chain and what we do in the supply chain part of how we transform organizations using digital, and specifically to drive operational excellence and competitive advantage? So this is not just about a thought. The question is, how do we actually do this? How do we achieve this? Now, my view, and my last point before I hand over with some questions, is that I think we face a dichotomy of pragmatism and scale. We need digital transformation to make real difference for people to pay attention. So if it's not going to be real in the supply chain, people will ignore us. But we also need it to be substantial enough that people want to assign scarce resources to this transformation. Now, unfortunately, supply chain people are busy and they're skeptical. At least more so than bankers, taxi drivers, and hotel receptionists. So how do we do this? Paul, let me start with you. Maybe you can give us some insight on how you think that digital transformation can actually avoid what you call pilot purgatory. And that is really moving beyond proof of concepts, and how do you scale those proof of concepts into benefit? Over to you.
Thank you, COBUS. Good morning, everybody from the States. I'm delighted to be part of this very distinguished panel. So pilot purgatory is a term that was actually coined by McKinsey a couple of years ago. It came out of a study that they had done looking at digital transformation occurring in manufacturing. And what they found was kind of rather startling. They found that over 80% of the pilot projects have been going on for well over a year. Yet less than 30% of the projects ever went to scale. So pilot purgatory really refers to the fact that there's a lot of these projects going on, spinning up lots of activity, but very few of them are getting to the point where they're going to scale and really impacting the business from an outcome perspective. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One is because of the technology. Now, this was applicable more from a digital manufacturing perspective. A lot of it was focused around IoT, which kind of really hyped up technology at the time. But I think we found that the same challenge with pilots applies across a lot of digital transformation spaces. And one of the reasons it's occurring is because a lot of these projects are very technology oriented, and especially with cloud technology, it's very, very easy to spin these projects up. And so what we were finding, I know what the study found, was that companies were spinning up many, many pilots, in fact, too many of them. And what you find is that when you're doing a lot of pilot projects, they're very difficult to really be able to have any kind of at-scale impact. The other thing is they were focused on technology as opposed to the business outcomes that those projects were trying to achieve. And while pilots, POCs, proof of values are great ways of understanding the technology, kind of the learn fast, feel fast environment, the double-edged sword because they are easy to spin up, and so it's easy for anybody just to kind of go run a kind of a pilot project, go get started. And the other challenge I think that we were seeing was that a lot of these projects were spinning up without any notion in terms of how they're going to actually scale once they were completed. So just a couple of thoughts to think about as you start doing these pilots, which are a great way of testing the technology and learning about whether or not they would have the right impact for you, is that make sure you're starting with an end in mind. And so when we work with our clients, we are actually looking towards establishing what we call a North Star vision in terms of what are you trying to get to, and then what are the series of steps, what's the journey you're going to need to get to from where you're at today to actually achieve that vision, which may be 3 or 4 years out. And as opposed to picking lots of pilot projects, pick 1 or 2 where you can really move the needle in terms of business impact. So really focus on the business outcome side and understand how those pilots are really going to change the outcome of the business. And then before you kick those pilots off, make sure you're doing so with a plan in terms of how you're going to scale it once it's done. If you've done it, for example, on a factory or a particular business unit, once it achieves that area, how are you going to extend it across the business to get at scale? So those are just some thoughts. I mean, I think pilots are great stepping stones, but they're not, they're means to the end and not the end that you're trying to achieve.
Cool. Thanks, Paul.
I'll stop there, COBUS.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it starts with a very practical perspective to say, well, let's start with the end in mind, which is actually about business and it's not about technology. Yash, can you maybe take that a bit further in terms of, what do you believe are the prerequisites for scaling value? So value being the end, and then what returns do you think you can actually achieve? Is this vanity or is this real?
Yeah, thanks, COBUS, and morning, everyone. It's great to be here with you guys. I think building on to what Paul said, our latest research is showing the same thing. 65% of POCs are scaled. So similar to what you said, Paul, 30-40% of these POCs don't actually get scaled. The scary thing, though, is of the 65% that get scaled, about a third of the value is actually lost, right? And there's a whole host of reasons for that. So it's not only just scaling them, but it's making sure that you're actually realizing the full potential of the ones that you do scale, right? And thinking about prerequisites and some of the prerequisites to get this right and extract the most value, really for us, there are 3 broad kind of categories that we are seeing. The first is to really be deliberate and clear about the portfolio of digital initiatives that you are driving. Paul talked about some of the points around making sure that you're kind of solving the right problems and building your kind of solutions with the end user or customer in mind. The other point I'd like to add on to that is, given that we're supply chain practitioners, supply chains are inherently connected. So when you're kind of going through a digital kind of set of or digital prioritization of your initiative portfolio, you really do need to have to think about the combinatorial value that you're creating across the supply chain. I mean, so often I see kind of companies that come in and tell me, yeah, we've got sensors on all of our kind of vehicles, but we don't really have the aggregation layer and the intelligence layer to do much with them. Well, then part of your investments aren't really achieving the full benefit. Likewise, I speak to a lot of procurement of CPOs that say, we've put in a new procurement platform that does some incredible analytics on sourcing, but we don't really have a way to do some vendor recon. So we don't know whether the savings we're actually locking in are actually being realized. So you do have to look at these things as the end-to-end value in supply chain. So getting the initiative portfolio right and thinking about the end-to-end value is a really important kind of prerequisite for us. The second one is the skill set. I mean, I know we've been talking, for many years about the skill sets that need to kind of accompany digital transformations. And what we're seeing a lot of supply chain leading organizations do is kind of establish centers of excellence around specific capabilities. Analytics. You see a lot of supply chain organizations have analytics COEs kind of being set up to kind of fuel their digital transformations. I think the important thing that organizations need to think about is what skills do you need and where do you want to build them? Do you want to build them, and do you want to partner with them? Because those are ultimately the 2 options you have to try and enable the transformation. Without the right capabilities, you're just never going to get there. And the final one for us is really thinking about staying the distance, right? Once you've actually committed to going through a specific initiative, make sure that you have the right sponsorship. make sure that you're looking at the distance to value. How long are you actually going to realize that value over, and monitoring and measuring, the achievement to that. Look, what we can say is, what I've seen across the industry is, there are some, organizations that are getting this right. I mean, we think about 10% of supply chain organizations really get this right. And those that do have a significant, kind of benefit associated with that. We're seeing, an additional or an incremental 2.5% EBITDA margin from that 10% that do get this right. We see that they are able to significantly improve their savings yields if they're in procurement, sometimes double their peers. And they're also able to kind of significantly decrease their costs, sometimes in the region of kind of 30 to 50%. So the benefits are there, if you kind of execute this in the right way.
Thanks, Yash. I think your points about the portfolio, being deliberate about the portfolio and specifically targeting value touches back quite well to what's already been said. But then adding on skills and stamina, or staying the distance, as you said. So Sean, maybe you can take also some of what already been said, but your view on the barriers companies face when considering digital transformation. What actually separates those companies that achieve great value from it, and then from those that don't? Because everything we've said so far sounds quite logical, but practically out there, what really makes the difference for people to get value from this?
I think that's a very interesting question. I'll take it in two parts if I can. So I'll take the sort of the challenges, and then I'll talk about the differences, really. I mean, the points that Paul and Yash made, I think, are incredibly relevant. I mean, I still see a lot of organisations that are what I call sort of initiative-rich but results poor, and data-rich but insights poor. They're always kicking off projects. They've got lots and lots of data, but they're not getting any real value from that. And why is that? That's obviously the critical question here. And I think it's an element of two things: one of legacy and one of leadership. From a legacy perspective, a lot of organisations, especially existing organisations, are tied down by a disparate and disconnected set of different systems that have been built up over the years, which have led to legacy data issues. So, we've talked for a long time, for years, going back to the ERP systems, that the need to own and to clean data and to understand why information is there and who's responsible for it. And, we've struggled with getting, lead times on and bill of materials correct. And now we're in a world where we've got so much data that's hitting businesses, and, they're really struggling to, create a solid foundation of truth within their ERP system, let alone with all of this new data. So we've got sort of legacy issues coming on from that, and then that sort of that's leading to organizational structure issues. Well, really, in fact, actually, I'll correct that. It's caused by legacy organizational structural issues. So, why have we got disparate information systems? Because we've got disparate functions and processes within our organization. We've got, we're functionally siloed. We've got disconnected metrics. That leads on to some of the points that Paul's made, that says if we're not clear about the outcomes we're trying to achieve, because we want different outcomes depending on where we sit in the supply chain, then actually, what do we want digital tools to achieve for that? And then, of course, the legacy thing that sits behind that is the point that Yash made, which is we also have, we have legacy skills. We have people in our organizations, who still have analog mindsets in a digital world. We still, believe that our experience that we've created over the last 20, 30 years gives us, credibility and value moving forwards, when in a lot of cases it's now being proved to be quite redundant in this new way of organizing. Now, of course, that leads on to the sort of second issue, which is one of leadership. And when I mean leadership, a lot of this is sort of cultural, really. So we've got, a whole host of different issues from a sort of a lack of a long-term vision, which I think was the point which Yash was making, which is, unless we're clear about what it is we're trying to achieve with all the digital tools, we're not clear about our customers and what our customers value, and where we're going to go as an organization, then, what is it we actually want to do with all of these digital tools? And without that long-term vision, there tends to be a focus on the short term, on the analyst expectations, on showing immediate ROI, which sort of limits the scope and of what you're experimenting with this. So
Clayton Christensen sort of once described there's 3 types of innovation. There's sort of, the sustaining innovation, and you've got sort of the improving sort of innovations, and then you've got your sort of really disruptive one. Well, if your focus is constantly on the short term, your focus is going to be on sustaining. It's going to be, how can we use these tools to potentially do what we've always done in the way that we've always done it? And it's trying to fit it into its, existing organizational model and the existing sort of, mindset of the organization. And you end up with companies who are trying to look at these digital tools because they feel they have to rather than because that they want to. And I think that's kind of the thing that differentiates the winners and the losers. The ones that are winning are very clear about, maybe not what the technology can do right now, but they're clear about who they are and who their customers are and what their customers value. And they're looking at these tools at ways to do that better. And if that means disrupting, a whole host of different things within the organization to operate in completely new and different ways to take value from that, then they're open to that idea. And when they go into the Skunks Works or the innovation labs, they're looking at the pilots and the projects with a clarity about how this initiative is going to align to the delivery of customer value, rather than I think a lot of other organizations that are just playing with the technology without a real clarity of how do we lift and shift that in order to deliver value. So I think the issues really are one of sort of legacy infrastructure and people and mindsets, and also that's driven by legacy leadership and sort of people skills moving forwards, which is the thing that really differentiates those that can sort of move beyond the sort of the industrial age and think about this as new ways to do business, not just new ways to capture data. Are likely to win, and you can see that very clearly. Companies that have all of this information and they don't know what to do with it. And YASH explained it quite well. We captured the data, but we have no way of visualizing or operationalizing it. So what are you doing with it? You end up with all of these sensors capturing all of this data, but you're not clear about why you're capturing it or what value it's going to give to you or how you're going to use it. And as a result, these projects become quite disappointing, and the leadership lose faith because what it wants is immediate return on investment, and it's not seeing it. So I think that kind of summarizes, I think, the difference between the two. And like I say, the companies that are, I think one of the really scary points for those companies that can't make that shift is the companies that can make the shift, the Unilevers, the J&Js, those sorts of people. They are completely rethinking the way their organization structures and operates using these new technologies. And the competitive advantage they're going to gain because of the insights they're going to be able to obtain that the other companies won't, and the costs they're going to be able to eliminate, is going to create such a gulf of performance that actually a lot of other companies are going to really struggle to keep up.
Cool. Thanks, Sean. I want to make an observation that all 4 of us in this first discussion reflected largely negatively on why things are not happening, and that's also the topic as well. Why is this not happening? And I want us to explore this a bit and maybe just, ask each other questions or respond. So, but isn't that part of our problem that we as supply chain people have actually been really successful leveraging digital? We have used master data for many, many years to run bills of material or procurement or IoT in the logistics world. We've actually been winning in terms of using digital to fundamentally improve supply chains. If we look at the availability of product, the costs of total end-to-end supply chains and agility, we've had a few glitches in the last disrupted world, but we're not actually doing too badly. But we're talking about what that we're not getting it right. So I just want to let's stay with the theme in terms of keeping the end in mind and value and driving leadership, but maybe also about what makes it positive. So because I do think part of our challenge is that we actually don't sell ourselves well. We talk to ourselves and our own people about how we're not getting it right. And again, and I'm not picking on our industries out there. They're all our clients. We all work with them every day. We enable them. But, they do small things and then they tell the world, whether that's in retail or banking or travel, and it becomes this shoo-wah where we actually do lots of things really well. So maybe circling back, Yash or Paul, what Sean has just said, but with a slightly more positive mindset around the successes we achieve rather than the reasons why we don't get everything right every time.
I think, COBUS, what you say completely resonates. I mean, I remember, 3-4 years ago, maybe even a little longer, when the whole digital wave started to hit and we started to speak to, chief supply chain officers and senior guys in supply chain talking about digital. And, the first reaction we got was, but we've been doing that. The level of automations are pretty high. we don't have a lot of manual stuff. We have most of our kind of procurement processes are already kind of sitting in these core procurement platforms, and we do have these pretty good end-to-end kind of supply chain platforms. So yeah, I think to some extent you're right. There's been a history of this kind of digital work that's been there way longer than most other functions. I do, however, think that over the last 18 months, with what we've seen in the world, COVID, economically, the game board has changed a little. The level of kind of supply chain disruption we've seen has been, it's been levels we haven't anticipated. And that has, to some extent, prompted the need for us to look at things a little bit deeper than we have before. I see a lot of, the whole supply chain resilience discussion. Yeah, it was there, for many years, but it's come to the forefront over the last, 18 months. And, the first place people start looking is, what digital kind of interventions can we put behind that? So completely agree. Lots of great stuff done. But the last 18 months has changed the game board a little.
Yeah, I was just I think we've seen very similar type of resurgence and interest in terms of applying, advanced digital technologies in the supply chain since COVID. And a lot of it, I think, was exposure around the inbound supply chain where folks just lacked visibility in terms of who was viable and who wasn't, and kind of surprised when, all of a sudden plants started shutting down. So we're doing a lot of projects, both from an inbound and outbound supply chain perspective. So I think I do fundamentally agree. I think as we started talking digital transformation several years ago, certain areas where you could apply things like IoT and AI in different areas, I think it started to grab more quickly. Whereas you were seeing a lot of those technologies, I think, were already being adopted on the supply chain side. But certainly COVID has changed some things. And I think one comment Sean made, I think a pretty good, couple of good comments in terms of legacy data, legacy ways of thinking. I think we're seeing that a lot in terms of there may be an appetite for change in certain parts of the organization, but you start to find other areas that kind of resist and really don't want to adopt new ways of working, yet they're struggling with lots of legacy data. So while we may have digitized the supply chain, unfortunately, we've done it in a siloed manner, and it's still oftentimes you get that end-to-end view. And so a lot of what we're doing as well is to provide that connective tissue that takes all these different silos of data and provides you with some visibility to it.
Cool, thanks. And Sean, before I give you another chance, just for all the audience, please send us some comments and questions in the discuss or Q&A tabs. Thank you very much for people that have done that already. I see Louise. Hello, Louise. It's been some years. You're saying that you agree that supply chain is not cool and we don't know how to market our space and innovation. I think yes, absolutely. And she's already some comments around. Sean, some people coming back to you. I trust you can also see the comments. You are obviously welcome to respond on them directly. And then I think interesting provocation in the comments around big business versus small business. Jeremy Baskin and James Meads has put some notes on to say, well, do we really think big business can do this? And I think that's an interesting other provocation around, can supply chains do this? Because supply chains are these big interrelated things that we silo up to be able to deal with them. Where in other parts, in fintech, you can carve out a little piece and go and play and do something. Where in supply chain, whatever you do in one place has a big impact in something else. And the way for us to cope with this. And how do we get over that? So I think that's maybe an interesting sort of wedge back into this leadership legacy around big business versus small business as well, Sean. But obviously other comments that you want to make.
No, I think you sort of touched on it there. You started off with I guess the challenge to supply chain that says, fintech seems to be moving quite quickly, and I don't think you have answered your own question there in some respects. Is that we can't break apart the supply chain. We still have real challenges getting organizations to think end to end, to think customer back, to think outside in rather than inside in, or even inside out. We're still challenged with that because of to manage something as complicated as an end-to-end supply chain, and all the way back from the procurement of raw materials through to the storage and delivery of finished goods and put it into consumers' hands, specifically as we move more and more into B2C. This is a complicated business, and And I think, supply chains, hasn't been sexy. It's been elevated through COVID, quite dramatically, which I think is a great thing for supply chain. It's been, you see it on the news being talked about all the time. At the moment we can't get, milkshakes and McDonald's, and it's a national crisis here in the UK at the moment. And, KFC might run out of chicken. So people are starting to talk about supply chain a lot. But, I always use the analogy, supply chain, the best supply chain in the world always used to be the invisible supply chain. So it's the one you never heard about. So the job of the supply chain was basically to be in the background and not drop the ball, so, it wasn't an area where you sort of, promoted it. And that the idea of sort of having supply chain people, on the board was revolutionary, let alone sort of running companies when, you think about it logically, the supply chain person is the person who's got the best understanding of the end-to-end element of the business and would be probably better positioned to run a business than, say, I don't know, a marketeer maybe, or a finance. And I've just lost a lot of friends in the audience here, I'm sure, from people who do marketing and finance. But, we've sort of been taught continuously to sort of almost be invisible and be in the background and, just deliver. Don't cause customer complaints, don't do these things. But now when we talk about digital, of course, it's almost twisting that on its head. And now we're talking about being incredibly visible, having enormous amounts of transparency, understanding the provenance of where everything came from, all the sustainability issues that hitting businesses that we need to have full understanding of, and the use of, visibility about everything, our consumer buying patterns and our movements all the way through to, our supplier and where they're located in their labor practices, and making sure that they're not, operating in ethical or ecological ways that might hurt our brand moving forwards. So it's a huge transformational shift in both, mindset within the organization, as well as a technological shift that we're trying to take advantage of at the same time. So, I think it is hard, it is difficult, and I do worry. Whilst we're in this stage where if you've read my book, we're in the sort of very sort of apex of change at the moment. So we're going through, very fast, very disruptive change at this moment in time. And I know there's lots of companies out here who are still talking about S&OP and are still struggling with their ERP systems and their implementations. In a world where we're talking about having real-time sense and response, self-driving, self-healing supply chains, and creating digital brains in the organization and breaking apart the organization so it's based around decisions, not processes. Well, that must sound like Greek to most organizations. They're really struggling to just be able to deliver. And now you're talking about completely changing the very nature of something that they're really struggling to understand in the first place. So, I think we shouldn't underestimate the challenges ahead, but I am fearful for those companies that are their mindset's going to hold them back. I think one of the things that this wave that gives me hope a little bit is the servitization of a lot of this stuff. So rather than maybe in the previous waves where you had to buy in all the skills yourself and you had to do things like, maintain all your servers and maintain all your infrastructure and understand how, SAP had to be configured. Everyone within the organization had to do that. Now, which of course, a lot of this is becoming servitized and you can buy it as a service, which I think is a little bit of a get out of jail free card, I think, for a lot of organizations that may traditionally have struggled with being able to understand a lot of this technology.
Cool, thanks. Yash and Paul, if you unmute, then I can also see that you want to respond. I want to pick up specifically, Sean, on a point you make around us being in the background and therefore just not be seen. I think what that also adds is that because we're not just in the background sitting there doing nothing. Whether you are running, again, procurement or planning or manufacturing or logistics, you're actually quite busy there in the background. Now we come with these new ideas, and it's like, well, how do I distract attention where the risk-reward ratio is quite wrong? There's a big risk that if I stop doing what I'm doing every day, even if it's not totally digitized and there's still some repetitive stuff, that I could drop a ball versus I'm going to do this thing that actually is not going to work. It's going to be another pilot that doesn't scale, or and we actually just never have the results in mind. I think you spoke earlier about initiative rich but results poor, data rich but insights poor. So it's also there's a huge risk of doing this, and there's little reward because the risk is that you drop the balls, and the rewards that it may just not happen. So I think it's an interesting challenge to get us out of our mode, but I would still say that even the next round of discussions here was quite negative, and I want to see if we can also say that part of what we need to do here is actually believe in what we do. And the thing we talk about as being that we need to integrate organizations, break down the barriers, this we've come a long way. There is actually quite a few supply chain people that have become CEOs, and even financial people that get it, that it should not just be about the accounting, and the way we account are different. So we have revolutionized this over the last, whether it's 20, 30, 40 years. So yeah, I think it is I think David's just made a note around that we need to take a seat at the table, and he's referencing Timothy's talk of yesterday again to say that if we do this, I do think we do it. I do think we just need to also believe in that we're making a real difference, and that changes some of the tone. But happy to take other comments. I see Uncle Bill has asked, why do we wait for something to go wrong, COVID, to wake up? I think that was a good check for the rest of the world of how important supply chains are. I think we've been pretty awake, but yeah, we do now realize that something like microchips is actually not that abundant and has a huge impact on the total economy, not just parts of that supply chain. So happy to take other comments. You can also see the questions.
Yeah, so COBUS, I just wanted to, I saw the point around and heard the point around, supply chain is not cool anymore, and all of those things. And I don't agree with that. I look at over the last year and the amount of transformation, and specifically digital transformation across supply chain. I've never seen what's going on over the last year, over the 5 years before that, right? I mean, I'll give you an example. Accenture's got 550,000 employees across the world. I cannot find one supply chain digital practitioner across the world at the moment. They are that busy, right? So we're seeing over the last year at least a huge uptake in kind of the supply chain moving to the center of the digital agenda and quite frankly even the transformation agenda in most organizations. I think the onus now is on us as supply chain practitioners to use this as a kind of a stepping stone, right, to continue it, because this is prompted by COVID, but certainly shouldn't end in the next 1 year when things start kind of getting back to a semblance of normality.
Yeah, I thought Sean made an interesting comment that, the good supply chains are the ones that are invisible, right? They just they work. You don't really worry about them. Things show up when they're supposed to show up. They get to the customer when they're supposed to get there. And I think what COVID did was, I think it maybe elevated and kind of exposed some of the areas in the supply chain that are perhaps weak. And while we may have, I'm thinking back a couple decades ago when we were putting in pretty advanced planning and scheduling systems from I2. Those are advanced technologies. I would say we were doing digital transformation, 20 years ago, right? The challenge in some cases, those haven't been updated. And so the opportunity here is look at, well, we're doing some great things. How can we take it one step further, right? Maybe there's some additional technology that might allow us to make some better decisions that we can't make today, or maybe we can in fact move more towards this more autonomous supply chain where it is in fact sensing changes in the supply chain and helping us understand how to react to those changes in a more proactive manner. So I do agree that we've made some great progress, and often cases supply chain just work. It's only something like COVID, which is just kind of really dramatic, frankly, to cause us really exposed where some of those breaks or breaks in the supply chain actually are occurring right now.
Cool. Actually, I think another a great question has just come up in the chat from Gerard asking for those who are left behind and recently made the mind shift, can they leapfrog themselves into an accelerated transform, or should they take a phased journey? My view is you can certainly leapfrog. And there's so many opportunities in Africa for that, using technology, because we sometimes don't have some of the legacy, whether that's infrastructure or leadership legacies, etc. So I do think that there's an opportunity to keep the end in mind, pick a few big fights and actually do things very differently using digital disruptors. But yeah, I'd love to get other, Sean, maybe comment. Do you think it's possible?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think the challenge with or the danger potentially of just looking at this very incrementally and looking at sustaining improvements is you never really shift your mindset into actually what it is the customers really valuing or where they're actually moving. You're always constantly looking at gradual improvements, marginal gain improvements, and maybe missing the big opportunities of actually saying, well, here's an opportunity right now in this period of change to actually rethink about, what is it actually that, their customer's job to be done? What is it that they really value? And how can these new tools actually help us to deliver this in new and exciting ways and potentially create new market space and new competitive advantages for us as an organization? Now, the challenge with that, of course, is it's a big question, and it's a question that most people maybe at the sort of mid to senior levels would say, well, it's not my question to ask. But I mean, really, they should be. I mean, and this is why we talk about transformation. We don't talk about, marginal change. We talk about digital transformation. The whole idea of digital transformation is it should be a transformation not just in machines, but also in mindsets and in business models and in methods, transformation across the organization. So, I think, to use the sort of commonly used phrase, we need to be thinking big, but yes, I accept that we also need to start small because we need to, we don't want to do the old big bang ERP implementations that shuts the business down. We need to be able to start with one supply chain, maybe use Pareto, 80-20 underneath that and start to, look at a sort of subset of products and customers we can get our hands around. But really, we should be thinking about how do we deliver new and better ways of delivering value to customers over and above what we've done previously? Because, if you think about the world our customers and our consumers live in now, I mean, it's radically changed over the last, decade. And yet our supply chains in many cases haven't radically changed. But here's the opportunity to do that, to really think about that. And I know, some of the leading organizations now are looking at things like, and do we need, we're structured around processes and activities. Do we need to do that? Should we not be structured around maybe decisions and use, artificial intelligence-based machine learning systems, like ERA, for example, to say, well, let's automate the decision-making process and let the machines do most of the hard lifting, and we can focus much more on actually being value-adding to our customers and spend time around customer service and spend time around, value proposition definition and changing the very nature of our way our organization works. Well, that's quite a radical shift to actually think about that sort of thing. And that needs, quite senior buy-in. But the opportunity is there. And I think, you are really limited by your thought processes. If you think that this is just a way to, maybe improve energy consumption figures or reduce a bit of waste management, then of course you'll use those technologies to do just that. But if you think it's an opportunity to completely redesign the way you deliver value and maybe reach new and exciting new customer segments, then it can do that as well. So I think absolutely it's an opportunity to leapfrog.
Cool. Yash, I'm going to come to you to help us also reflect back on the question around how do you pick the opportunities. You spoke about being deliberate about the portfolio, and that you need to make sure you unlock value. So is there some practical? How do you actually decide which things to pick? And in my view, this is one of our biggest problems in that we have this, and I called it earlier, the dichotomy of pragmatism and scale. You want to do things that's going to make a difference, but you want to do things that's going to make a big difference. And how do you, that dilemma, that dichotomy, how do you address that? You did speak about it earlier, but maybe just circle back to that. And we've got lots of other questions that I'd love to get to. So.
I think when you're looking at your initiative portfolio, one of the thoughts or the thinking that we have is break it down into 3 chunks. What do you want to do now? What do you want to plan now? And what do you want to dream now about, right? Because so often I see organizations doing all of the really complicated stuff. We want to put Watson in here. We want to do, all of these very complicated things, which give you value maybe in 5 or 10 years, but doesn't really help you right now. So try and separate your portfolio into those 3 buckets. What do you want to do now? What do you want to plan now? And what do you want to dream now about? And quite frankly, look at all of these digital initiatives as you would any other investment. They need to be tied towards a value lever. That value lever needs to be measured. And there needs to be an investment case against it, right? I know it's not always the easiest things to measure, right? Because there's so many different things that influence the supply chain. But if you look at the investment that you're making versus the expected result that you're expecting over whatever period, there must be a benefit of doing this. So treat it as any other investment. That would be my kind of thoughts on it.
And then track it afterwards, which is also sometimes we get attention deficit, and then we do it, and then we don't actually track the value realization. And sometimes people think the business case was just to make the decision. The business case is actually to be able to track the realization of that value, not because you want to do an autopsy, but because you actually want to learn and do something with the learnings. So yeah, thank you. Paul?
Yeah, I was just going to add what Yash had said. So, what we'll do is we'll take a look at the various initiatives as part of the overall program and look at them from probably 3 different dimensions. At Yash's point, what's the business values? What's the impact to the business? So that'd be along one dimension. The other one is really how difficult it's going to be to actually implement. What's the level of technical complexity to actually implement this thing? To Yash's point, a lot of people are drawn to the sexy projects. I want to use AI. Only realize they don't have the data to do the AI project. So what can we actually do? And so let's start to get you through the ones that are actually achievable and those that have the biggest impact on the business. And the third dimension, and this may apply more to larger enterprises, is can it scale across organization? So if you think about kind of a consultancy, kind of a 2x2 matrix, kind of a bubble chart with the size of the bubble being the level of scalability, but that will often help you kind of figure out, okay, these are the smaller group of projects that really make sense from business impact, and we can, in fact, get them down so the risk is much lower. So we'll often look at it from that perspective.
Cool. Some questions, one question specifically around the retail environment and one related to telematics. Do we, and I think the question is there value? Is there things to do? My sense is absolutely. But I am going to start off again by saying we've actually already used digital quite well. And sometimes people talk about AI and machine learning, and I sort of always come back to the fact, well, the first form of machine learning I worked with was a VLOOKUP in Excel. That machine learned to do a lot of things. And there's no difference between, for that matter, if you go and look at the algorithms that IT used in the 90s, it is also machine learning. So again, there's much more we can do. For me, I think a big is around this, using the data to get to insights to take action rather than having it. But again, if you look at telematics and the benefits that telematics has had in terms of the safety management of our transportation fleets, in the past, we've used that very well. But now, how could we use that to improve efficiency or improve agility? So I do think building on the base of what we have, but then asking, well, what more can you do? What's the value? Where's the impact? Keep that in mind, and then drive new things to actually improve customer service, reduce cost, reduce inventory. So I think that is what's coming through. I want to maybe provoke another question, and that is are we good enough? Is our world as complex as we make it? And the question I'm really asking is, we talk about digital and supply chains, and it's complex, and there's legacy and culture, but people don't understand supply chain. The people out there, outside our industry, they relate to the parts of what we do. They can understand that we must buy things, and we must make things, and we must store things, and we must deliver things. But isn't part of our problem that we actually think it is complicated? So, but shouldn't we be better at making people understand how this interrelationship works? Or is it just challenging because it is a system that's integrated, and therefore people are not going to get it? So my question really is, do we need to do more to educate non-supply chain people about the supply chain so that they can also see, the opportunities or the improvement and the role that digital plays in changing that? Or is that, am I just going off the rocker here and that's going to be, let's get on and do the work and not worry too much about it? Happy to ask, further comments on that.
Yeah, I think your overarching statement is absolutely correct. We're not good at promoting ourselves, and a lot of cases, within organisations themselves, we don't understand. So maybe supply chain itself can sometimes mean different things in different organisations. I remember once I worked for a luxury automobile who was convinced they had an end-to-end supply chain, but it stopped at the manufacturing plant. It didn't go in anywhere near the showrooms. It didn't go anywhere near the commercial side of the organization. So, even the definitions of when we talk about end-to-end supply chain could differ based on, which organization you're dealing with. In some cases, I've huge manufacturers I've worked for where supply chain's been a subset of procurement, for example. So it's sat underneath procurement rather than on top of procurement. So, it's been difficult to I think promote something when we have so many different variables about what actually it is we talk about and what it actually means. And then of course, we have a difficult job selling within the organization, selling it to the commercial side and to the account managers and these sorts of things. So they understand what the implications of a lack of visibility of promotional information or that sort of thing can actually have on the supply chain. So then lifting that and shifting that into the wider world, I think, is going to be more hard when we're not clear about ourselves. And I think, what I advocate all the time to companies that I talk to is, forget the tools, forget digital for the time being. I think the clarity really has to be about, segmenting your business into, strategically aligned end-to-end supply chains with a clarity of definition about, which customers are you serving and what do they value and how do we deliver that value? And then working back across all the different elements that are involved in being able to deliver that, the things that are within your control and the things that are out of your control. And being able to identify, strategically, do we need to be more reliable here or more responsive? Do we need to be lower cost for these items, or do we need to be, sweating our assets more? So unless we have that sort of clarity of what strategically we're trying to achieve to do the different supply chains within the organization and where they start and where they end, it becomes very difficult then to start to talk about things like digital tools, about how they're going to improve our ability to deliver those particular outcomes, because we're not clear ourselves about what those outcomes are. Too often we have organizations that kind of measure everything, and we've been very good recently at sort of visualizing it and using things like Tableau and having great dashboards, but there's no real insight in that because we're not clear about what it is we're actually trying to achieve. So we kind of measure everything, average the results, and as long as the average looks okay, then that's fine. So it's difficult, I think, to be real sort of self-congratulatory and sort of, but maybe that's maybe the wrong word, self-promotional about this when we're not even clear ourselves about what we actually mean when we talk about supply chains and what the strategic outcomes we want from those supply chains. So I think let's start there. Let's start by being clear about that. Work from the customer back, identify what they value, create the business model, understand that we're an absolutely critical component now of a business model. I mean, I use the line a lot that said, we used to sort of say, companies compete. And then Martin Christopher in 2001, one of my colleagues at Cranfield said, companies don't compete, supply chains compete. I don't believe that's true anymore. I believe business models compete now, of which supply chain, of course, is an absolutely critical component of that. We are delivering value propositions to customer segments, and it's aligned by our clarity of a strategy, and then how we use our organizational elements, all of our supply chain elements, our network, and our processes, in order to deliver that, that value proposition to that customer segment. So let's start with that. Be clear about what it is we achieve, because then we become talking about the things that are really important to the people at the top of the organization. But we're also talking about things that actually customers recognize, rather than talking about measures and metrics that only mean something to people within the supply chain world.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Sean. That was actually almost a great closing. We can stop there. We're actually out of time, but I'm going to just give Yash and Paul a quick chance to also close a bit, and then I'll say the last word. But thanks very much. I think that does bring it together for a lot of this, Sean. So, Yash, Paul, you want to go?
Sure. Look, I think it's been a great discussion. Thanks for kind of having us. I really do think that now is the time, right, for supply chain and specifically the digital agenda in supply chain. I think it's going to be an exciting next year as things kind of unfold on the economic and COVID related front. I think there's a lot going to happen in this space. So definitely looking forward to it. And this topic is right up there on the agenda for most of our clients.
Well,
no, I've learned a lot. I think it's a great session. I want to go read Sean's book now. No, I do agree. I think supply chain's cool now and a great space to be in. And these technologies are really, really fun to play with. So this is a great time to be in the supply chain space. So I agree. This will be a great couple of years ahead here.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I absolutely, I think it's been a great discussion. We could probably keep going for a while. For me, absolutely agree. There's so much opportunity. I do want to make the call that we must stop and think about what we've already achieved, and that we've actually done a lot really well. And not for a moment, therefore, say we shouldn't stop doing more and find more things to do. But I do think there's so many really good digital transformation examples in how we've already changed how we do things. And if we package those and we tell people about it, we'll create momentum for the new generation, for people who think differently, to come and help get more of that. Data science, I want to use as a sort of closing example. Data science is a fantastic field. And within supply chain, there are great opportunities to use data science to make better decisions, to create value, to drive better outcomes. But I would argue that in the world of big data, we're not there to show that we're actually the place where you can come and play, because we're not even telling people about what we've already achieved. So I think agree. Thanks. Great discussion. My call to duty to all the people out there as well is about what we've already done. And I think that you may have missed part of my closing there. But thank you very much. I think we are out of time, and have a wonderful last day of the conference.
Thank you, COBUS. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Yash.
Thank you. Thanks, Yash, Paul.